From the right, I'm Matt Lewis.
From the left, I'm Bill Scher.
And you're watching
The Week in Blog.
This week, Tea Party protests for Tax Day. Heritage Foundation enters the political realm. We're about to enter the big battle for Supreme Court nominee confirmation. But first, Bill, financial reform has been the hot political or policy topic this week. What's going on in the liberal blogosphere on that count?
Well, after the president met with the top Republican and Democratic leaders at the White House yesterday and pretty much came out of that explicitly deprioritizing bipartisanship and prioritizing a strong bill, which they did not do in any debate to date. They never explicitly said so emphatically that we're not going to let bipartisanship get in the way of a good bill. You got some plaudits on the left. Zach Carter, who's blogging at my group site, ourfuture.org, Campaign for America's Future. Democrats show some backbone on Wall Street reform was the headline. And this has always been the question for all these issues. Is it better to do everything you can to compromise because then you get at least some bill done, you get an accomplishment under your belt, you move the ball forward, or in some cases is it better to have a fight and maybe you don't get the bill right away, but then you can take it to the midterm elections and beef up your ability to do something bolder after Election Day. And Paul Krugman was one on, I think he did it on his blog and in a column, saying, look, I understand on health care, you got to cut the deal because if you don't do it now, you're not going to address this issue for another 10 years or more. On Wall Street reform, it's better to wait and do it right because if you do it wrong, you won't find out that you're wrong until the next crisis hits 10 years later. So it seems like, at least rhetorically, there's been that push, getting some support in the blogosphere for that. You had Simon Johnson at Baseline Scenario, who gets a lot of love from Huffington Post, former IMF economist, saying, pushing back on Mitch McConnell, that Mitch McConnell's line has been, this bill is akin to making permanent bailouts, and that getting a lot of pushback in the blogosphere. People citing the Frank Luntz memo from several months back that leaked, instructing Republicans to call any financial reform bill a bailout bill. And the last point I'll make on this, and I should say with Simon Johnson, he's someone who's not been all that thrilled with the legislation coming out of the White House, saying it's not strong enough, but he was out there very forcefully pushing back on Mitch McConnell. You had Senator Chris Dodd making a very fiery speech on the Senate floor on Wednesday, which he repurposed into a Huffington Post blog post, took the video snippet of him on the Senate floor in the blog post, really going after McConnell and other Republicans for falsely saying that the bill would institutionalize bailouts, saying that the opposite is true. And I think it's somewhat of a sea change to see. I mean, we've seen politicians blog before, and I'm not sure Dodd is the first to do this, but I thought it was a very effective use of taking a strong floor speech, excerpting it, making it to a blog post, so it doesn't just end up in the C-SPAN dustbin. It becomes something that creates a larger life. It'd be interesting to see if more and more senators and congressmen actively try to do things on the Senate floor that are YouTube worthy.
Well, I think it is interesting because normally when politicians blog, it sucks. They're usually not very good at it. And, it's sort of like when your parents try to dress cool. It just doesn't tend to work out. Unless your mom's Angelina Jolie, and then it's hot.
But I thought it was interesting that there was so much pushback, people calling out the old Frank Luntz memo to try to sort of negate its power. The talking point has less juice.
Why does Frank Luntz telegraph? I mean, I'm convinced as soon as he writes a memo, that he blasts it out to the press.
I mean, we don't know how it got leaked. It may be that Luntz was doing some self-promotion there.
What, you think
that
Frank
would not
Luntz
be out of character with Frank Luntz, I'm sure.
No, that's like, what? I'm shocked that there's gambling taking place at Rick's Of course Frank Luntz is doing, but yeah, he's the consummate self-promoter. Come on.
Well, what does it say then about, let's not get into a debate about you and me, but are conservative bloggers taking that line?
Well, I think that there is they're still weighing. On one hand, we have people who are. We have Peter Wallison writing at the Enterprise blog, which is part of the American Enterprise Institute. It's their blog. He says this bill authorizes the Fed to regulate all non-bank financial institutions that are systemically important or might cause instability in the U.S. financial system if they failed. These words mean something, that the companies designated for Fed regulation are too big to fail. It's so obvious that it should not have to be repeated, but it seems that Dodd and the administration believe that as long as they don't actually say these companies are too big to fail, no one will notice. And by the way, Rush Limbaugh spent a lot of time the last couple of days talking about this, talking about the chilling impact that this could have. As you know, the Citizens United case recently said that corporations, although they can't contribute directly to a political candidate, they can be involved in politics. He believes that there could be a chilling effect if the government, if the government essentially has the additional regulatory powers over businesses. But Matthew Continenti at the Weekly Standard saw it a little differently. He said, at issue is the Dodd's Bill's resolution authority to break down large, complex financial institutions on the verge of insolvency. Mitch McConnell says the authority, which would include a $50 billion fund to pay for the resolution process, would incentivize too big to fail and lead to more bailouts. But then he goes on to say, memo to Republicans. You are about to step in a political trap. The GOP has focused so much on the downsides of the Dodd proposal, it hasn't made clear that it supports sensible reforms to correct the imbalances that led to the 2008 financial crisis, nor have Senate Republicans forcefully outlined detailed proposals of their own. I hate to read that much to you, Bill. I know people don't like it when we read, but I think it's important to see that Republicans are, I don't want to say struggling, but they're wrestling might be a better word, with how to come down on this. On one hand, I think a lot of Republicans and conservatives see this as another potential government grab. On the other hand, there is a danger of Republicans looking like they're in the pockets of Wall Street, and that with just a few months left to go before the midterm elections, that would not be a good narrative to have stick.
Well, was there anyone in the conservative blogosphere scratching their heads at why McConnell and Mike Pence were attacking this bill literally the day or the day after they met with hedge fund managers?
I'm trying to think. I believe that Morning Joe, I think that Joe Scarborough was commenting on the horrible optics there.
Right. I mean, this is not necessarily whether you think it's a right position or the wrong position, but obviously there's got to be a concern. I think there's a concern of both parties that they're being seen as too close to Wall Street for different reasons. Yeah, and I mean the truth is that a lot of times Republicans are confused for conservatives and conservatives are confused for Republicans. But I would say, and here I go again, defining what a real conservative is, but I would say that real conservatives are actually very skeptical of big companies. And again, I hate to recommend it, but Jonah Goldberg's liberal fascism makes a very good case for why big companies are not conservative, and why why they're not. It's not a natural alliance between conservatives and big business. But in any event, certainly I think that it's a important political point to make that it is not great for either party to be seen as the party of Wall Street going into November. So there was talk earlier that this bill had the greatest potential for a strong bipartisan vote for that very reason, that there'd be a number of Republicans that would just say, look, I do not want to be on the wrong side of this issue. We've been able to kind of ding the Democrats for being too close to Wall Street because they've had to defend the bailout under the Obama administration. But if they put a bill on the floor that is seen as cracking down on Wall Street, I got to get on that side of that. I know John Thune was saying earlier that there was a lot of interest in voting for something. But now we've had at least a temporary partisan spurt over the issue. But Corker's still out there trying to say, look, let's try to do a deal here. But do you have a sense, maybe this is a blog question, but a Matt Lewis insider Washington question. Is there a sense that there are going to be some Republicans that are going to get on whatever bill Democrats put on the floor, whether it's the pure Dodd bill as it stands or something else?
There may be one or two, but it certainly will not be a trend.
They only need one.
Yeah, well, that would do it, right? And it could be Corker. By and large, conservatives and Republicans are going to be opposed to this, I would say, on philosophical grounds about giving the Fed and the government more power to regulate companies. And really, there doesn't seem to be any criteria for what would no trigger mechanism. So, in other words, if a president didn't like this corporation because they didn't support them for whatever reason, they could use the power of the government to come down on them. So I think that, and by the way, I mean, someday there will be a Republican president, so it's something that both sides should be concerned about.
Well, now, I mean, obviously the Democratic approach to this, I mean, there are people on the left that are not happy with the bill because it doesn't do enough to limit the size of banks off the top. So you can't have a bank that's more than this much. So the bill doesn't do that. What this debate over is, do you have this resolution authority? So if a bank does fail, there is a process in place that allows the government to step in and dismantle that business, which is different than a bailout. A bailout saves the company. This is to end the company, but try to do it in an orderly fashion. So Democrats would say this is our move against Wall Street run amok because we have the ability now to clamp down and prevent them from taking down the entire market with them. If you're a conservative and you don't like giving government additional regulatory power, but you don't like big business having too much concentrated power, what do you do? What is the alternative policy do you put in place?
Well, I think part of it is this notion that what caused the financial crisis was sort of unfettered free market run amok, and conservatives believe that the opposite is true. Without getting into the CRA thing with the housing crisis and all the other issues involved, I just think it's a big philosophical difference. And the way Washington works, I'm not sure that much will actually be done. But I think that from a political standpoint, I do not see Republicans voting for this bill. There may be one, and as you said, that very well may be enough. But I do think Republicans are going to be careful in terms of how they position themselves and their rhetoric. I think that you'll see them, hopefully, if they're smart, not aligning themselves with Wall Street in any sort of way, being critical of Wall Street. And by the way, I mean, I think that part of the conservative philosophy is that you should be allowed to fail. I'm against TARP. And that was Bush, right, bailing out the banks. And I think that that part of conservative philosophy is that you should allow people to fail. That certainly doesn't make you a friend of Wall Street. You know, what's the line about how they want to they want to be free market when they win, but they want to be socialize losses. There's a lot of truth to that. So it's not inherently conservative to to oppose that. So in any event, we'll have to wait and see how it shakes out. Let me ask you this: is your take that the Dodd proposal at this point is set in stone, or do you see them being willing to make big compromises, along the way?
What about big compromises? Even though there was a sharper edge to the partisan rhetoric this week, there's still an undercurrent of, hey, we're still here to talk. In fact, just today, Corker and Dodd had what's known as a colloquy on the Senate floor, where Corker is still saying, "Hey, my door's still open here." I do think they want a bill. The general MO of the Obama administration is let's show that we're doing things. But this issue with Wall Street is so politically toxic that they want to be careful they don't just take anything that if it's pilloried as weak on Wall Street, that could be very politically dangerous come election day. And so they feel a little bit safer saying no to a weak compromise here than not. But it does, since there do seem to be Republicans interested in coming on board, and not just Corker. One other issue that I think the blogs are picked up on more than I think the other media outlets did. Blanche Lincoln, who's the Democrat chair of the Agriculture Committee, which has some jurisdiction over derivatives, and the Dodd bill essentially had a sort of a placeholder for derivatives, waiting on what the Ag Committee would come up with. Lincoln, of course, has been enemy number one of the liberal blogosphere, inducing a primary challenge, Lieutenant Governor of Arkansas, Bill Halter. All its expectation was that Lincoln was going to do something very favorable to Wall Street, very weak derivatives reform, in partnership with the Republican ranking member, Saxby-Chambliss. This week, she breaks from Saxby-Chambliss. She puts on the table a tougher derivatives bill than has been proposed anywhere so far. Tougher than what's in the House, tougher than what the White House was doing. And when she did that, she got plaudits from, I think it was Olympia Snowe. Forgive me if I'm confusing Snowe with Susan Collins, but it was one of the Republican senators from Maine. So you might win another Republican on the basis of that. And because there's these openings still, I certainly think they're not taking a Dodd bill or nothing approach. They're still talking.
And by the way, some people think I look like Bill Halter, so I'm not sure if that's a good thing.
I can see that actually,
but I hear that. Apparently, he's closing the gap.
Some people say I look like Blanche Lincoln.
Yeah, well, I thought about it. Blanche Lincoln was supposed to be on ABC's The Top Line today with Rick Klein, and I thought, wouldn't it be funny for me to show up over there like in a suit and intercept her outside the ABC studios in D.C. and challenge her to a debate and see if she might fall for it.
Just so I'm properly citing the blog that I was thinking of, Brian Butler at Talking Points Memo DC, he was the one in particular that cited the primary challenge that Blanche Lincoln had for implicitly pressuring her to take this move and break from what she had been her bank or her Wall Street friend. She'd been very favorable to bank interest up until that point. So seeing score one for primary challenges having tangible merit beyond whoever wins the primary, actually affecting policy before the votes are taken.
No, that's a good point. Also, I think the latest poll I saw, he was Halter's narrowing the gap a little bit. He's still down in the polls to Lincoln in the primary, but I think he was up in the polls compared to what he had been. So,
and so I think this Halter's most recent ad is tagging him for being close to Wall Street. This puts a wrinkle in it. It makes it a little hard to make a clean shot on that point.
Meanwhile, I guess part of the narrative that this is another government grab or government trying to do a takeover, this time in the private sector, in business. The tax day tea parties have begun.
Drove by my house.
And a couple things of note. One, there were these stories that liberals may infiltrate tea parties and pose as conservatives, and but spew hateful, racist, whatever rhetoric. So Michelle Malkin had a post today. Be safe out there. A few tips on how to spot tag a Tea Party infiltrator. She had a few. One, ask them what the 10th Amendment says. 2 letters BO, and I'm not talking about the president's initials. So apparently liberals smell, I'm guessing. A glaring obvious lack of subtlety, and she links to a picture that's been circulating on blogs like the Say Anything blog and I think World Net Daily. I almost called them the derisive term. And basically it's this like long-haired hippie obviously not a conservative holding up like a hateful conservative sign. Number 4 is upside down flags. And number 5, from a reader, Amy, a free infiltrator. Sign up here. Click to download large site. I'm going to hold up, Bill. Let's see if this works. This is a sign that you are to print off, and it says infiltrator. This person is not a real Tea Party patriot, and there's an arrow. So conservatives were advised to bring these signs, and if you see someone who's an infiltrator, hold it up and point the arrow at them. We've talked about this before, Bill, about how important or how effective are protests. And there was a good piece up at the Washington Examiner essentially asking that same question, if I can find it here.
While you find out, I'll make
sure.
one point about Michelle's post. I did notice her tweet that yesterday, and she pointed to the link of a Colorado site that was actively encouraging such infiltration. The group the website that she pointed to was clearly an extremely obscure organization that's clearly on the anarchist tip, not really a mainline liberal organization. So I'm sure you have a smattering of people on the fringe of the fringe who want to do stuff like that. I don't see any evidence that there's any kind of widespread progressive movement attempts to do stuff like that. And I mean, we've had this Tea Party Express, rolling through from Searchlight to D.C., and I haven't seen an actual instance of this even happening. So I suspect that what Michelle is doing, and Michelle is very expert at this, she finds the few people who you could argue are on the left who are doing things that are particularly outlandish and hold them up to the light and try to use that to define who the left is. But I think because there's so many more platforms of the left now, I think it's harder and harder to do that.
Yeah, and it happens. I'm trying to remember what the last time was when there was a conservative, a very, very minor conservative site who said something outlandish and it got blown out of proportion. So the Examiner basically calls out, says basically thousands of Tea Party demonstrators are expected around the country today, but the movement must decide whether its purpose is merely to organize demonstrations and express outrage or to move on to the next crucial stage of a successful grassroots revolution, electing a new generation of public officials with the guts to make the hard decisions. They recommend they check out this thing called Post-Party Summit, which I guess will provide organizing workshops and training workshops for people who are part of the Tea Party. Another thing to note is Daniel Foster over at NRO links to a Gallup poll which shows that that most Tea Party people are not well, I'll read what he says. But our friends at the left who imagine a movement of yokels and bumpkins might be surprised to learn that Tea Partiers tend to be better educated than the general public, and they will be downright shocked to learn some of this. And he then links to a Gallup poll which talks about who the Tea Party protesters are. So they're not the Cletuses that some people would have you believe they are, according to the Gallup poll.
Well, there was a similar poll in the New York Times today that also headlined Tea Partiers are wealthier and more educated than the public at large. And I don't think liberals were surprised by that because as part of that, they're also more Republican, more conservative, more white, more male, older, and inherently right-wing in their views. And a lot of that correlates, income and education, do tend to correlate. So none of that, I think, was terribly surprising for people, put into the larger context. And in fact, you did see a lot of delving into the specifics of the New York Times poll to reinforce, the broader image that the left has of the Tea Party. You had Digby pointing out, taking the race angle. There was a line in the New York Times article that said they are more likely than the general public and more likely than Republicans to say that too much has been made of the problems facing black people. You had America Blog pointing out a line in the poll saying that 24% of Tea Partiers, which of course is a minority, still 24%, saying it is justified for citizens to take violent action against the government, or it is sometimes justified for citizens to take violent action against the government. You had
doesn't everybody believe that though?
What's that?
Doesn't everybody believe that? Sometimes
most Tea Partiers don't. It was 31% that don't, but you had.
Look, sometimes justified. What if our government started rounding up the Irish and sending them to concentration camps? That would be
I think it's a fair point. Obviously, you can interpret that question a lot of ways. There's a way to have an answer for that question if given the chance to speak in more than a soundbite. To say, well, of course, if X is happening, that's outrageous. You would do that. But certainly, the way the left is looking at that poll number to say, look, this is clearly the piece of the Tea Party movement that is sympathetic to the acts of vandalism and violence that we have seen a smattering of over the course of the last several months.
All right. So what's next, Bill? What's next on our agenda today?
The other aspect of the conservative movement, outside of the Tea Party Express, was this news from the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah, this is big.
That they were going to open up a separate sister organization that would do direct political activism. It's called Heritage Action, I think. Yeah,
I think that's the name of it.
And I know Red State had a post mocking liberals for being outraged at this development.
Well, yeah, I'll just read a little bit of it. He says, Ed Fulner and Michael Needham just launched a major assault against the left that has many on the left soiling themselves today, collectively soiling themselves today. The sleeping giant that is the Heritage Foundation has woken up. Fulner is the president of the Heritage Foundation, and Needham is the CEO of Heritage Action for America. That's the name. Well, I guess that's the name of a sister organization. And here he goes on to explain historically. He says, for a few years, the right sat on the sidelines while groups like the Center for American Progress and other left-wing agitation and noise machines set up 501c4 groups tied to their 501c3 groups. The tax code was murky at best. The left took risks while the right sat it out. Many a right-of-center lawyer advised caution while the left damned the torpedoes and went full speed ahead. This is a very important development, Bill, because first of all, the Heritage Foundation is obviously a huge and powerful organization. Secondly, he's right. It was the conservatives who in the 70s and 80s built these think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, like the Leadership Institute, like Cato, which is more libertarian. You had groups like Eagle Forum, Gun Owners of America. I mean, you can go down the list. And so a lot of the success that conservatives had in the 80s and 90s were very much tied to this infrastructure that conservatives had built in the 60s and 70s. But then, I guess, after kind of McCain-Feingold, conservatives believing that it would be overturned were sort of slow to the game. And they were also, I think, conservative, not politically, but conservative in the sense of, let's not rock the boat, let's not take risks, we don't want to violate the tax code or even come close to the line. Liberals were much more aggressive, and I think some of their success in electing Barack Obama and taking the House and the Senate was tied to this superior infrastructure. And one can only hope, if you're a conservative, that the Heritage Foundation is serious about this and that it will start a trend. I used to work at the Leadership Institute. It's a 501c3 organization. I remember sitting down with Morton Blackwell, the president, and trying to talk him into starting some sort of a PAC or actual political arm. He was reluctant to do so for a variety of reasons. I guess he does have a CL PAC, a conservative leadership PAC, that's entirely separated from the Leadership Institute, but one can imagine that there's a lot of conservative organizations out there who could be more involved politically if they set up the appropriate legal structures, as opposed to. And don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of training and think tanking and putting out policy papers, but obviously the left has done a better job in the last decade than conservatives.
I'm not even sure everyone on the left would agree with that statement. But although I do think the left has grown dramatically, their modern institutions have sprung up over the past, I'd say, 5 years. But I think most people on the left would say that they still feel outgunned by the conservative infrastructure that began in the 70s. And Jonathan Chait at the New Republic, in response to the Heritage Foundation's Wall Street Journal op-ed announcing the new Heritage Action for America. That's the official name.
Is that the name? That's the official name of it? Okay, so
yeah.
then that the CEO, I just read his name, but it will
Michael
be
Needham?
Yes, he'll be the CEO of the new group
Right.
then.
And the op-ed refers to the Heritage Foundation. They call themselves the beast of all think tanks. So Jonathan Chait says, "Wow, the beast, great moniker. Nothing says intellectual credibility like being compared to a powerful, ravenous, unthinking animal. The joke here is that Heritage
Bill.
needs to create..."
You guys can stab it with your steely knives, but you just can't kill the beast.
So Chait goes on, the joke here is that Heritage needs to create an advocacy institute to be more beastly than its regular think tank work. Heritage needs a separate advocacy arm because the rules of a nonprofit forbid it from advocating for or against legislation, but it's not as if Heritage actually takes this seriously. And then quotes from Michael Kingsley's 1993 column about how Heritage repeatedly would cross that line. And the reason why Center for American Progress, which is one of the newer institutions on the left, sprung up was a recognition that Heritage was a new breed of think tank that was more like an advocacy tank that had a far greater percentage of its budget put into marketing than research, whereas Brookings, which is a super old school think tank, was all about research and didn't do very much promotion. And Center for American Progress was, okay, let's have something that's more in the Heritage style.
Yeah.
So no one ever looked at Heritage as being really out of the political fray. So at least it's an open question, I think. Does this
let me tell you, man,
really
the amount of
change
money
that much how Heritage operates?
The amount of money. Look, my experience with these groups have been that they spend a lot of money on leather couches and LCD, flat screen TVs, and they all get dressed up in their nice suits and they go to their nice offices.
That's fighting words, Matt Lewis.
They do a lot of thinking. They do a lot of defending Paul Ryan reflexively. But I'm glad that they're shaking it up. I think they need to, and I think that my experience has been these groups have been overly conservative, in the sense of, well, the lawyers don't want us to go there, man. You know what I mean? I feel like that they've been too conservative.
You have been in the room? This would be news to a lot of people on the left. You have been in the room where an idea gets put forth, and someone on the conservative side says, "You know what? That might cross the line. Let's not do that."
Oh yeah, many, many times, and the hand wringing that goes on. And
the notion that there is hand-wringing, I think, would blow the minds of any hand-wringing about anything.
And there's a lot of... there are a lot of things...
explosive in our heads.
Well, I'll give you like a prime example. Without giving too much away, recently there was a non-profit 501c3 conservative organization. And Martha Coakley had this statement, and this was right when she was running. Keep in mind, Martha Coakley was the sitting Attorney General of Massachusetts, and I'm trying to remember what the statement was. It's funny, Bill, how we obsess over things, and then 2 months later, no one remembers what the big deal was. But she said something that was very concerning regarding church and state. Very concerning for religious Americans. And I could Google it and find it in like 2 minutes. But in any event, there was a conservative organization that I'm familiar with that I think they ended up sending out an email to their list mentioning this, that the Attorney General of Massachusetts, and they actually quoted the line, and that's why if you care about defending freedom and religious liberty or whatever, send us money. But there was like a lot of meetings taking place because she was in a race at that point. She was running against Scott Brown. And although the fact was that she's a sitting attorney general, there was a lot of concern. Well, maybe we shouldn't talk about this because she's in a race. And I mean, so the point is, yes, there's a lot of worrywarts, and they're not just conservative philosophically, politically. They're I think very conservative in terms of a lack of aggression. By the way, this is sort of a common problem too, that people who work in campaigns understand. If you've ever worked on a campaign, you act quickly. You know, Carville and Begala said speed kills, and they were right. You have to make quick decisions. And then people later who get involved in public affairs and have to deal with corporations or nonprofits, with lawyers, they want to pull their hair out because it's just the countless meetings. And look, you know as well as I do, Bill, think of it when what's his name, Joe Wilson said he lied. Joe Wilson's opponent, like that night, sent out an email and raised money. And the next day, Joe Wilson raised like $1 million. But what if they had to sit around for a week with lawyers debating whether or not they can send out a fundraising email? The moment would have passed.
Right.
So, look, this is just, it's obviously this transcends the Heritage Foundation. This is sort of a pet peeve of mine, as you can probably see. So I am glad that they are doing this, and I hope that they are very aggressive and effective in what they're planning to do.
It'll be very interesting to see if there's a change in energy, change in impact from this move of theirs. One last topic before we wrap up this edition of the Week in Blog: the looming Supreme Court nomination process already. Churning on both the left and the right. I know on the left, a 1-2 punch from Huffington Post and Salon's Glenn Greenwald put Elena Kagan, the current Solicitor General, in the spotlight, holding her up as someone for the left to oppose, but someone seen as a front-runner candidate for the president to pick. A Huffington Post, both Sam Stein and Ryan Grimm, their two top reporters there, said very flatly that she is, quote, far more conservative than Stevens and could shift the political dynamic of the High Court. Conservatives are responding favorably to the potential of a Justice Elena Kagan, while liberals worry that by choosing other administration would miss an opportunity to elevate a genuine progressive. Greenwald then picked up the baton, headlined his post, "The Case Against Elena Kagan," mostly focusing on her testimony when she was nominated to be Solicitor General, and seemingly agreeing with Lindsey Graham on the issue of detentions, and combined with the fact that Kagan does not have a big paper trail because she's not a sitting judge. She hasn't really engaged in a lot of constitutional debates publicly, and so raising the specter that we don't know what her record is on these issues, you can't trust that she will be a strong pick. This prompted one other Huffington Post commenter, Linda Monk, who is a constitutional scholar, said Elena Kagan could be the next Earl Warren, and said that progressives should be cheering for her because she's shown the ability to work across ideological lines when she was at the Harvard Law School, and could put together strong majorities for progressive goals. So it's by no means that I think Huffington Post and Greenwald are defining Kagan for the entirety of the progressive base. But it will be interesting to see if she does get the pick. One, if it does lead to a bigger split on the left, and even if it does, that just end up greasing the skids for a nomination in the as an end result.
Well, it's interesting because there really is no history that I'm aware of Democrats nominating somebody who turns out to become conservative. It happens all the time for Republicans. And Dan Flynn over at Flynn Files is mentioning this point in a blog post. Why can't Democrats blunder so monumentally in their judicial nominations? The retirements of Republican appointees Sandra Day O'Connor and David Souter have eroded the visceral sense of an opportunity lost in that 1969 to 1993 era. He goes on to say, you can't trust Democrats to do the wrong thing, just don't trust Republicans to do the right thing. So it's interesting that Democrats are obsessing over this, when it has been Republicans, I think, who have been burned numerous times, including John Paul Stevens, who was nominated by Gerald Ford. There is not a sense among Republicans that Kagan will be conservative. It is assumed that she will be a liberal. Now, who's the other? There's a gentleman on the D.C. Circuit Court, I believe, whose name has been floated. He is widely...
I know you're talking about, but the name's escaping me too.
He's on the short list, and I think he's widely thought of as being moderate. But in terms of Kagan, there is no hope that she's like a stealth nominee. It is assumed among conservatives that she will be a very liberal. Now, here's the one point I think that Democrats and liberals are not as concerned about as they ought to be. I would say that at this point, liberals and Democrats should be less concerned about a nominee who isn't adequately liberal or progressive enough. I don't think that's their problem. I think their problem is finding someone who has a personality, a forceful personality, who can sway the court. Sonia Sotomayor is not that person. And right now, it is Republicans, Republican nominees, but I would say originalists or strict constructionists or whatever you want to call them. People like Scalia and Roberts and Alito and even, although a lot of people think he's a lightweight, I would even say Justice Thomas, but especially Scalia and Roberts, who are intellectual, forceful powers on the bench. And so it's not just about how many, conservatives do you have, how many liberals do you have. It's also about the force of their personality. So,
and that was the argument that Linda Monk was making at Huffington Post, that Kagan fits that profile. There's two things I'd say in response. One, I don't think Obama has to worry about anything, and when it comes to this nomination, I think whoever he picks is going to get it. It's not going to be that big of a deal. And if there is a fight, quote unquote, it's going to be for show. It's not going to actually put the question of that person's confirmation, his or her confirmation, in any kind of jeopardy. I think the Sonia Sotomayor debate, proved that. Very much the same way I was very frustrated when Democrats did not go after John Roberts very hard, and that very much set the stage for, a weak fight against Sam Alito as well. Once you sort of set the precedent that you had 8 Republicans say, I may not love Sonia Sotomayor, but I'm not going to oppose a judicial nominee unless it's absolutely insane. That's precedent is set. It's hard to move off of that on the next one. So I don't think it's really. I don't think the White House has too much to worry about with this. And to your second point,
let me just real quick interject, Bill. Keep in mind, Sotomayor sailed through, but she was the first Latina. It was still President Obama's honeymoon, essentially. And we didn't have Scott Brown. So, there are things differently. So it's very possible.
Well, yeah,
I don't predict
Alito
it, but it's
was a little bit tougher than it was with John Roberts.
Right.
I think we've seen that there are enough Republicans who, at the end of the day, do not want to filibuster every last judicial nominee if they don't have to, because they worry about what goes around comes around. And you only need to get one. Last time they got 8. I don't think they're going to go all the way.
Oh, don't worry.
0.
You can count on Lindsey Graham. He'll vote for whoever you guys put up there.
Graham, Snow, Collins, you're done. There's not a lot of value, I think, for the party as a whole to make that a do or die vote, unless Obama picks someone who was truly out to lunch. And I see zero chance that he would do that because no one's taking this process lightly.
Well, Bush did it with Harriet Miers. So.
Well, I'm not sure Bush took it lightly with Harriet. Harriet Miers is an interesting example where a nominee blew up.
Yeah.
But I think in that case, the White House was concerned that a conservative with a paper trail would have too many openings to get Democrats unified. This is when Democrats, I think Democrats had a majority of the Senate at that point. would be too many openings, and it would be unified too many Democrats to filibuster. They want people with clean slates that were harder to take nicks at, and the conservative base, surprisingly to me, although their bet paid off, and still did not trust George Bush deep into a second term to say, hey, I don't have a paper record, but hey, you're George Bush and you've been the most conservative guy since Reagan, so I'll take your word for it. They opposed it.
But that bar was pretty low, though, Bill. Being more conservative than Bill Clinton or George Herbert Walker Bush was not a lot. No, conservatives were right.
I would thought the bona fides would have been there just as much as I would think the bona fides would be here with Obama at this point. I'm surprised you're getting pushback from the left with Obama for anyone that
I think it's good to push back. I commend them, and they don't stop pushing back, because Republicans and conservatives made a mistake when they did stop pushing back. And one of the best things that conservatives ever did was block Harriet Miers, because she very well could have been a stealth nominee, or at best, I mean, look, Sam Alito is pretty much a rock star. You couldn't have done much better than Sam Alito. Certainly better. That's what
I would say.
So,
poster of Sam Alito on my wall. You rock.
Look, don't stop believing. Hold on to that feeling. That's all. That's my advice for
But the conservatives got to prove their point that you could confirm somebody with a conservative paper trail,
right?
When you have enough Democrats who will roll over for that guy. And I think Sonia Sotomayor had certainly a number of liberal things in her paper trail, and you got enough Republicans to vote for her. So
I think the lesson conservatives learned from all these bad nominees, including John Paul Stevens and Souter, was that you have to have a paper trail. Is that somebody has to,
Roberts didn't. I mean, Roberts got in with the scantest of trails.
Yeah, but clearly he had a well-developed judicial philosophy. He wasn't...
Which he did not share with anybody until he got into the position.
He wasn't somebody, though, that was going to be become a judge and then be influenced by others. He knew who he was. I mean, Harriet Miers, for crying out loud.
Well, if you read the book The Nine, Jeffrey Toobin's book on the court, he argues, or he reports, if you want to trust his reporting, that Harriet Miers was the one in the Bush White House saying, we don't know if John Roberts is conservative enough. I want to see more of a paper trail on John Roberts before I get behind this guy.
Yeah.
He was arguing that Miers was a perfectly conservative choice. The conservatives should be very happy with her if they only knew what she was doing inside the Bush White House.
I'm skeptical, and I'm not willing to trust George W. Bush with a lifetime appointment. A lifetime appointment, which will. And by the way, let me just say this: as much as Bush made mistakes, he provided two amazing Supreme Court justices who, although we had to fight him for Alito, but he nominated two tremendous Supreme Court justices, which will have lifetime appointments. That is an amazing legacy, and he did something that Ronald Reagan didn't do, which was two great appointments. So, although Bork would have been,
you don't really know whether you're liberal, moderate, conservative, who you're going to find to be tremendous until you see the tenure of their entire career. You have not seen a lot of liberals saying John Paul Stevens is a tremendous justice early in his career when Gerald Ford nominated him. And he certainly has not been, by any means, a party line liberal or a judicial activist of any sort. In his own description, he's small C conservative. You only do what you need to do as a judge and no more. But you're seeing liberals really laud him now, and yet turning on Kagan before not even knowing very much about her. So you don't really know what she's going to do when she gets. You don't know what any judge is going to do until they
Here's
get
my
there.
advice to liberals, though, would be, and it's sincere advice, would be don't take anybody's word. So, like, we got Souter because John Sununu apparently vouched for him to George H.W. Bush, and I think we got what's her name, first female.
Sandra Day O'Connor.
Sandra Day O'Connor. I don't know if it was Barry Goldwater who vouched to Reagan, or if it was just that Reagan wanted to appoint the first female Supreme Court justice, or whatever. But whatever the case, it's not about you're not applying for a job at Dairy Queen, right? So somebody recommending you or vouching for you is not justification for putting somebody on a lifetime appointment.
Soutered was surprising to George H.W. Bush in the end, where Soutered went. Since then, I don't think any president, Democrat or Republican, is going to nominate someone that at least the internal vetting isn't extremely thorough. But the problem is, it's next to impossible, even those who have paper trails, to fully know what someone might do once they get in that position, and there's no political checks on their decision-making.
You guys confirmed somebody who said that a wise Latina woman would make a better decision than a white man. What will disqualify a nominee, if that won't?
Apparently not that.
Apparently not. Apparently not. So, anyway...
which is why I'd say Obama's got pretty much a free pass on this. I can't see what he would do that would make someone not get confirmed.
You're probably right, but it will be interesting to see if how this plays in the 2010 midterms. Because if this is bitter and contentious, does it spill over into November? So,
and that could cut either way.
It could. That's why they play the game, Bill, as they say. That's why they play the game.
Always good to talk to you, Matt.
Good talking to you. Check us out on, you can listen to this on iTunes. Just search for Blogging Heads. You can find us on Twitter at The Weekend Blog, on Facebook.com/The Weekend Blog. And check out Bill's podcast. Was it Liberal Oasis?
LiberalOasis.com.
You can check out mine, The Matt Lewis Show, also available on iTunes. And we will see you next week
at the movies
on The Week in Blog.
Take care.
Thanks.